She told me she almost didn't notice it. She is a professional appraiser. She has examined thousands of objects, and her eye is trained to catalog condition, not meaning. The doll was a Meiji period Ichimatsu, stored in a collector's house in Osaka. Between the first photograph and the second, taken 3 minutes apart, its posture had shifted. She was alone in the room. This story comes from Keiko, an appraiser based in Tokyo. She spent 6 weeks with a single object before she discovered that it was not an object. Everything. The subtle deepening of the painted lines around its mouth, the collector who wrote, "She is almost my age now." The doll maker who could not account for what his own hands had made. And the moment Keiko spoke the name of the dead child it was made for, is exactly as she described it to me. The machiya was narrow the way all old Osaka houses were narrow, built for a city that charged rent by the street frontage. Every room running back from the entrance in a long dim sequence, like a sentence that kept going after you thought it had ended. Keiko arrived at 10 in the morning, 2 days after the collector's death and 1 day after the executor's call. She had driven from Kyoto with her camera bag and her assessment case, and the particular professional composure that came from 20 years of handling other people's accumulated lives. She was good at this work. She was used to the stillness of houses after loss. The executor, a young man from the legal firm, let her in and stayed near the entrance. He did not follow her into the rooms. The collection was orderly and substantial. Lacquerware, woodblock prints in protective sleeves, a pair of Edo-period tansu chests that would do well at auction. She moved through the inventory methodically, photographing and noting, her handwriting small and precise in her assessment book. The light inside was filtered through shoji screens, even and gray, the kind of light that made everything look older than it was. She found the doll in the third room. It was seated in a low lacquered chair positioned near the alcove, facing the room's single window. The chair was clearly placed for it, sized and angled with deliberate care, not left casually. The doll itself was Meiji period, Ichimatsu style, porcelain face, glass eyes of a particular clear brown, hair that was human and had been combed recently enough to still hold its part. The kimono was silk, pale gray, with a pattern of winter plum blossoms, and it was not a reproduction. The weave and the dye were consistent with the late 1800s, possibly earlier. Keiko crouched in front of it and looked at the face. The expression was neutral in the way that Meiji dolls were often neutral. Not quite serene, not quite sad, occupying the careful space between feelings that skilled craftsmen of that period understood better than most. The lines of the painted mouth were fine and precise. The glass eyes caught the window light and held it. She photographed the doll from 7 angles, noted the dimensions and condition, flagged the kimono for textile assessment. Then she moved on. She reviewed the photographs that evening at her hotel, a business hotel in Namba with good lighting and a desk wide enough to work at. She went through the day's images in sequence, cross-checking against her notes. When she reached the doll's photographs, she slowed. She had taken 7 shots in a sequence, covering perhaps 4 minutes. In the first 3, the doll sat with a slight inclination to the left, a natural settling into the chair's cushion, the kind of posture that accumulated over years of remaining in one position. In the 4th shot, taken after she had moved to get the window behind it, the posture was different. The doll sat straight. The inclination was gone. She checked the timestamps. 4 minutes and 17 seconds between the 3rd and 4th images. She had been alone in the room. She had not touched the doll. She looked at the 7th image, the last, taken from directly in front at eye level, for a long time. Then she closed her laptop and went to sleep and told herself that posture in aged dolls was affected by temperature changes, by the vibration of footsteps, by any number of physical factors that a careful appraiser should note and then set aside. She went back the next morning. The executor let her in without questions. She went directly to the third room. The doll was in the same chair, the same position, the pale gray kimono, the combed hair, the glass eyes facing the window. Keiko set down her camera bag and stood in front of it and looked at the face for a full minute without moving. The lines around the painted mouth were deeper than they had been yesterday. Not dramatically, not the kind of change you would notice in passing. But she had looked at this face for a long time, and she knew faces, and she was certain. She picked up her camera and began, very carefully, to photograph the doll again. The estate papers were in the study at the back of the house. Keiko spent the third morning there, working through the filing cabinet and the 2 boxes of documents the executor had stacked against the wall. Provenance documentation was the foundation of any serious appraisal. She needed purchase receipts, correspondence with dealers, import records, any paper trail that could establish where each piece had come from and when. Without it, the collection's value was estimated. With it, it was known. Most collectors kept poor records. Tanaka Hiroshi had kept excellent ones. The filing cabinet held purchase receipts sorted by year, dealer correspondence in labeled folders, auction catalogs with handwritten annotations in the margins. She worked through it all steadily, cross-referencing against her inventory list, flagging items that needed further verification. The journal was in the bottom drawer, beneath a folded cloth. It was not hidden, simply placed at the back of the drawer, the way objects end up at the back of drawers, when they are not consulted regularly, but are not to be discarded. A standard hardbound notebook, the cover worn soft with handling, no label. She opened it to the first page, 1983. The handwriting was precise and slightly formal, the Japanese of someone educated before the war who had kept his written style intact through decades of disuse. She turned pages. The early entries were dated and orderly. A record of acquisitions, assessments, occasional reflections on the market. Then, in an entry dated April 1983, a new subject appeared. He had acquired the doll from a dealer in the Shinsaibashi district, who had been unwilling to provide the previous owner's name. Tanaka had accepted this with apparent equanimity. He described the doll with the precision of a man who knew objects. The Ichimatsu construction, the glass eyes, the condition of the kimono, the quality of the hair. He estimated her age at approximately 60 years, based on construction details. He noted that her face had an unusual quality, not the standard neutral expression of a display doll, but something that suggested a specific person had been used as the model. He catalogued her twice more that year, and said nothing else. The entries about the doll continued through the 1980s, with decreasing frequency and increasing care. By 1991, they had changed in character. Briefer, more observational, less analytical. She looks different in winter light. I moved her chair 3 centimeters to the left. It was the right decision. Small notes, almost incidental, the kind of thing a person wrote when they were registering something they were not ready to examine directly. After 2005, the doll appeared in the journal only rarely. When she did, the entries were short, 3 words, a date and a weather observation, and then her name. Tanaka had started calling her that by this point, just she, as if there were no need to specify. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before his death. Keiko read it twice. Only a date, the same careful handwriting, and a single sentence. She is almost my age now. Keiko sat with the journal open in her lap and looked at the wall. Tanaka Hiroshi had died at 82. She knew this from the executor's paperwork. She worked the arithmetic the way she always worked numbers, methodically, without rushing to the conclusion. The doll had been estimated at approximately 60 years old when acquired in 1983. If that estimate was correct, the doll would have been constructed sometime around 1923, which would make her, in the year of Tanaka's death, approximately 100 years old. 100 was not 82. She worked it again. Then she counted forward from the acquisition. 40 years of the collector's observations. 40 years during which the doll's face had, by his own careful, private account, continued to change. She put the journal in her bag. She went back to her hotel. She ordered food she did not eat. She sat at the desk with her laptop and her photographs and her assessment notes and the journal beside them. And she looked at all of it for a very long time. She did not sleep that night. The municipal archive opened at 9. Keiko was there when the doors unlocked, which was not something she usually did. She was methodical in her work, not urgent. She moved through appraisals at the pace the evidence required, not faster. But she had been awake since 4 and had written 3 pages of notes in the margins of her assessment book, and by the time the archive's lights came on, she had already been sitting outside on the steps for 20 minutes in the thin morning cold. She was looking for craft records. Osaka's pre-war artisan registry had been partially digitized and was accessible through the archive's internal terminals, a project that had taken a prefecture cultural department 15 years and was still incomplete, but comprehensive enough for the Meiji and Taisho periods if you knew what you were searching for. She searched for Ichimatsu commissions from the early 1920s, Namba district human hair. There were 11 entries. She worked through them one by one. The 7th was the right one. The commission record was 2 pages, filed under the workshop name of a doll maker in Shinsaibashi, whose family business had operated from 1889 to 1952. The entry was dated 1923. The commissioner was listed as a merchant family, the Matsumoto household of Namba. The commission was for a single Ichimatsu doll, girl type, to be made to resemble the family's daughter, Fumiko, aged 7. The specifications noted human hair provided by the family, glass eyes in brown, a first kimono of pale silk to be included with delivery. Delivery was scheduled for autumn 1924. Keiko turned to the second page. There was a handwritten addendum, dated November 1924 in a different ink, added after the original entry. It said that the commission had been completed and delivered as specified. It said also, briefly and without elaboration, that the subject of the commission, Matsumoto Fumiko, had died of typhus in the spring of that year, before the doll's completion. The family had received delivery as planned. The entry ended there. Keiko sat back in her chair. Fumiko had been 7 when the commission was placed. The doll had been made to look like her. And then Fumiko had died before she ever saw it. She sat with that for a moment, then returned to the terminal and searched for any subsequent records connected to the Matsumoto household or the doll maker's workshop. She found one, a note in the workshop's maintenance records, dated 1940, recorded a home visit to the Matsumoto residence to assess the condition of the 1924 commission at the family's request. The note was brief, written in the same precise hand as the original commission entry. The doll was structurally sound, the kimono intact, the hair well maintained. The family had clearly cared for it, but the doll maker had added a separate observation set apart from the condition assessment by a line break, as if he needed physical space between the professional record and what he was about to write. He noted that the doll's face had changed since his original delivery. The expression, which he had constructed to be gentle and slightly open, appropriate for a 7-year-old girl, had become, in his word, wearied. He could not account for it technically. He examined the painted surface and found no evidence of repainting or external alteration. The lines were original, but they were not the lines he had painted. The note's final line was short. "I will not return to assess this piece." He had not. Keiko closed the digital record and sat at the terminal for a long time without moving. The archive around her was filling slowly with other researchers, the soft sounds of chairs and laptops and pages being turned. Someone walked past her station and paused to look at the screen, then moved on. She was thinking about a 7-year-old girl who had died before her own face was finished, and about a doll that had been aging in that same face ever since. She wrote Fumiko's name at the top of a fresh page in her assessment book. Matsumoto Fumiko, born, she estimated, 1916, died 1924, age 7. Then she closed the book and sat in the archive's fluorescent quiet and said the name to herself once, just to hear it said aloud by someone. She left the hotel at 5:15 when the light was already thinning. She brought nothing with her. No camera, no assessment book, no professional case. She wore the same coat she had been wearing all week and carried her keys and her phone and nothing else. She took the subway to Tennoji and walked the rest of the way through streets that were filling with the early evening movement of the neighborhood. A man pulling down shutters on a dry goods shop, 2 school children on bicycles, the smell of something frying from an open kitchen window further down the lane. The executor had given her a key for the duration of the assessment. She used it now without calling ahead. There was no one to call. The house was empty. The machiya was different at dusk. During the day, it had the contained quality of a place being evaluated. She had moved through it as a professional, cataloging and assessing, her attention always divided between what she was looking at and what she was recording. Now, alone and without equipment, it was simply a house. Old wood, old stone, the smell of decades layered into the walls. The shoji screens glowed faintly with the last of the outside light. Her footsteps were the only sound. She went directly to the 3rd room. The doll was in the chair. She was always in the chair. Pale gray kimono, parted hair, glass eyes facing the window where the sky was going from amber to gray. Keiko crossed the room and sat down on the floor in front of her, close enough to see the painted face clearly, and settled her coat around her knees and was quiet for a moment. She had not planned what she was going to say. She had driven to this house on something that was not quite instinct and not quite professional obligation, but was somewhere between the two. The feeling that she had found something that needed to be finished and that she was the only person positioned to finish it. She looked at the doll's face, the lines around the painted mouth, the clear brown of the glass eyes in the last light. Then she spoke. She said the name first. She said it the way she had said it to herself in the archive. Clearly, not quietly, not as if she were afraid of the sound of it. Fumiko. The room held the name the way old rooms hold sounds, briefly and completely. She described what she had found. The commission record at the workshop in Shinsaibashi, the family's name, the year, the specifications. Human hair, glass eyes in brown, a first kimono of pale silk, the typhus in the spring of 1924, before the doll was finished, before Fumiko ever saw the face that had been made to look like hers. The family who had received delivery anyway, and kept the doll close for as long as they were a family. And then beyond that, passed to dealers who would not name their sources, passed to a collector in Tennoji who had watched the face change over 40 years and had written about it only in private and had died with a single sentence left to say. She said all of this to the painted face in the dusk light, the way you speak to someone who deserves to know what has been found out about them, not performing it, not offering it as a gift, just transferring information that had been overdue. Someone came to find out who you were, she said. I found out. Your name was Matsumoto Fumiko. You were 7 years old. She stopped. The doll did not move. She had not expected it to. But she looked at the face for a long time in the last of the fading light. The lines around the painted mouth, the glass eyes, the expression the doll maker in 1940 had called wearied. And what she saw now was not the same thing she had been looking at all week. It was subtle. It might have been the light, which was doing what dusk light does, softening edges, shifting what seemed certain. She could not have described it precisely enough to write into her assessment notes. But from a certain angle, in the room's last warmth, the painted face looked less like a face that had been carrying something for a very long time. It looked like a face that had just been allowed to set it down. The appraisal report took 4 days to write. The inventory section was straightforward. She had the photographs, the condition notes, the market comparisons, the lacquerware, the tansu chests, the woodblock prints. Each piece documented, valued, recommended for auction or private sale. She wrote that section in a single afternoon, and it said everything it needed to say. The provenance section for the doll took longer. She had never written a provenance record like this one before. Provenance was usually a chain of ownership, dealer to collector to institution, with dates and purchase prices where they were available. It was a document of transactions. What she was writing now was something else, the record of a person, brief and specific, assembled from craft archives and a doll maker's unease and 40 years of a private journal. She wrote it the way she had been trained to write assessments, factually, precisely, without interpretation. And it took her 3 drafts to get it right. The final section read as follows. The Ichimatsu doll had been commissioned in 1923 by the Matsumoto household of Namba, Osaka, for their daughter Matsumoto Fumiko, born approximately 1916. Fumiko died of typhus in 1924 before the commission was completed. The doll was delivered to the family as planned and kept in their care for an indeterminate period before passing through private channels to subsequent collectors. This provenance section constitutes the first formal documentation of the doll's origin and of Matsumoto Fumiko's identity as the subject of the commission. She read it back twice. Then she wrote the recommendation. The doll should not go to auction. Given its age, its condition, its documented cultural and historical significance, and the unusual nature of its provenance, it was her professional recommendation that the piece be donated to Osaka's Municipal Folklore Museum for permanent inclusion in the collection of pre-war domestic objects. She recommended that the display card carry the following information: the doll's construction date, the workshop name, and the name of the child for whom it was made. The museum's curator called her within a week of receiving the report. He had questions about the journal. She answered them carefully and sent him photocopies of the relevant pages. He called back 2 days later and said the acquisition committee had approved the donation unanimously. The doll was installed in the permanent collection 6 weeks later. The case was glass-fronted, lit from above, with the kind of warm, even light that museums used for textiles and objects sensitive to temperature change. The lacquered chair had come with her, placed at the same angle it had always occupied. The museum's conservator had studied Keiko's photographs to position it correctly. The pale gray kimono was freshly documented, the condition assessment on file. The display card was small and handwritten in careful brushwork, mounted on cream card inside the case. It gave the doll's construction date, the workshop, the commission year, and then, on its own line separated from the technical details, commissioned for Matsumoto Fumiko, born approximately 1916, Osaka, died 1924, age 7. Keiko read about the old woman in a short article published in a local Osaka paper. 3 paragraphs buried in the culture section prompted by the opening of the museum's new pre-war domestic life display. A staff member had noticed her standing in front of the Ichimatsu case for a long time on the exhibition's first morning, long enough that the staff member had approached to ask if she needed assistance. She had declined politely. She had stood a while longer, then she had left. The paper noted her age, 96, because the staff member had asked, out of concern, not nosiness, and she had answered. She had not given her name, she had not explained why she had come. Keiko read the article at her desk in Kyoto in the late afternoon, with a cup of tea at her elbow that had gone cold while she was working. She sat with it for a moment. Then she set the article aside and went back to the commission she was currently writing, which was about a pair of lacquered trays from Ishikawa Prefecture and required her full attention. She did not need to know who the old woman was. She did not need the story to extend any further than it already had. Fumiko's name was in the record. Someone had come to stand in front of her face. That was the whole of what had been needed, and it had been done. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.